Welcome to the podcast. It's the best podcast in the world. This is going to end up on the show. I know it, motherfucker.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to episode 101 of Epitome of Stupidity, your favorite allegedly metal podcast. And I'm happy to note that as we start the next 100 episodes, we're doing so with Huntsmen, who was the first actual interview on the show once upon a time and are now joining me for the third damn time. Each time they've been on the show, we've talked about an amazing album of theirs, and today will not change that. The outro is a song called This Our Gospel, the first song on their new album, The Dry Land, which will be out June 7th by Prosthetic. Hi, Steve. More on them and all that shortly. If you're new here, welcome in. I'm Clint, and I'll be your host. If you're not new here, I want to thank you for continuing to listen. I promise better personal hygiene and more cuss words going forward. Returning listeners will also know that we're fans of drinking the good stuff around here, and to do so, you should go to brimminghornmeadery.com and pick out some award-winning and delicious mead. Then at checkout, use code EPITOMEAD, that's EPITOMEAD, and get a 10% discount on your order. They'll then ship all that deliciousness right to your damn door, and after you're good and mead drunk, you can send me drunk thank you messages. There's no downside here. Link to their shop in the show description, along with the band and the podcast link. So from here, we'll jump to what I've been listening to lately, because I've got a microphone. You know what? Hell with that. Send me messages. Tell me what you've been listening to. I want to know. I want to hear some other stuff. Maybe it'll spur on another guest on the show or something. Tell me what you've been listening to, so it's not just me saying that, well, here recently, I've been listening to the new Thou album, Umbilical, because it's finally actually out. I know I've mentioned it a few times on this here show. And now that it's actually been released, it's been mixed in with a bunch of Huntsmen, which I'm listening to, obviously out of enjoyment, but also as a little bit of like enjoyable fucking homework as I get ready for this show. Some Russian Circles out of pure excitement in relation to them announcing some shows related to their 20th anniversary, and I sure as fuck intend on seeing at least one of those. And I've been mixing in some of Paul Berry's new album, Mind Burns Alive, as well. There's some good stuff all in there. Anywho, back to Huntsmen. Dubbed folk metal, which is both a form of accurate and starting to feel outdated or wrong with the way their sound is evolving. They can certainly tell a tale with their music, though. Since 2014, they've released 3 full-length albums, being 2018's American Scrap, which was the album that got me into them. 2020's just fucking massive Mandela of Fear. Mandala, let me say it every possible way. Of Fear, which saw them leaning a little heavier, and 2024's The Dry Land, which again, I feel like is going heavier and heavier and heavier, along with 3 EPs interspersed along the way. The Dry Land is the first album with Amy Bueno-Knipe as a full-time member, though her vocals have appeared on the previous albums, and this will also be the first album for, Gavin, the new guitar player, Gavin. Gavin Cushman, I believe is his name. Huntsmen have done and grown a lot over the course of their 3 full-length albums and the EPs. I think maybe we talk to, let's pick one of my actually seriously favorite bass players, their bass player, Marc. Now, where is that button for the dumb fake phone sound? Oh, here it is. Beep, 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 boop. Ring. And he answered. On the line with me today is Marc of Huntsmen. Marc, how the hell are you today?
I'm doing pretty damn good. How are you?
I'm not too shabby for a Monday, all things considered. What are you listening to lately?
Lately, been listening to a lot of like Thundercat. Um, the I got recently turned on to an artist named Ethel Kane that I've really just been enjoying. It's just heart wrenching material. Was actually introduced to her by the guy who does A&R for Prosthetic Records, Steve. He just randomly invited me. He's like, "Hey, I'm in town from Madison with my daughter. You want to go to the Riv and see Ethel Kane?" And I was like, "I have no idea who that is, but sure, I trust you." And went and just completely got knocked on my ass. Just like to tears, everything. It
Oh
was
wow.
awesome. So really enjoying that. Her latest release I think, in 2022. So I've just been just having that on repeat. The new Pallbearer, from what I've heard, is awesome. The new resin tracks, awesome. Loving like the Kendrick Lamar disc stuff, which has been fun.
Sure.
Just a nice decent range, and then of course I got my other records that I just sort of like kind of like fall back to. Like this today, I was listening to "The Aura Will Prevail" by George Duke. That band was just incredible. Chester Thompson, or not Chester Thompson, Lenny White, Alfonso Johnson, just big influence of mine on bass. So wide mix of stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I'm gonna kind of go off my script here for a second, and you say the bass influence there. I was kind of planning this conversation around two of you and didn't want to get too far into that, but I personally, as a bass player, fucking adore your playing.
Oh, thank you.
What are some of your influences? Who are some other people that have got you where you're at?
It started with Les Claypool. I was 13. He was on an episode of Reverb, which was a live concert series that HBO did back in the day. They played My Name Is Mud. I looked at my older brother, who's a guitar player, and I was like, dude, I'm ready to play bass, and I want to play bass like that guy. So that's kind of where it all started. Definitely like influenced early on by a lot of like jam band bass players, Phil Lesh, Mike Gordon, and then of course like the virtuoso players who are adjacent to that scene, like Victor Wooten, and then kind of got into like Jaco Pastorius, so like sort of the obvious ones. But as I got older, I would say Paul Jackson, um, from Herbie Hancock Headhunters is a big influence. Alfonso Johnson, again, another influence of the session, like fusion player. Jeff Mass from High on Fire, as far as my distorted tone. Really love what he does, just absolute ripper. Chris Squire from Yes, Geddy Lee, Rush, and just a bunch of others sort of like in between. Actually, been recently kind of like getting into like just improvisation in general. And the past couple years, I've seen a couple shows with Tim LaFave, who's a bass player. He's just another session bass player who's played with everybody. Like I think his most recognizable body of work was with on David Bowie's final record, Black Star.
Oh, really?
And then like the Danny McCalson, I think it's a quintet playing with that dynamite stuff. And then of course my buddy Kevin Scott, who he's currently the bass player for Government Buell, but he's also just a sort of like master at improvisation, has a real thick tone. And I can't forget Dusty Hill from ZZ Top.
ZZ Top, sure, yeah. They just announced another tour and they're coming to Columbus, and I really want to go, but it almost feels dirty to see them without Dusty. But at the same time, it's ZZ Top.
Yeah.
But anyways, you speak of tone a couple times there, and you have a fucking gnarly tone on these past couple albums. What are you using? How are you getting to that?
Well, this most recent record was an exercise in self-indulgence, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And fortunately, the recording engineer, Pete Grossman of Bricktop Records, had a lot of really great stuff at his disposal and just had such a great, like, can-do, yes and sort of mentality. So he didn't really shut me down at all. So the signal chain on the bass was just bonkers. I don't think anybody would ever know. I think it's just something that I wanted to do and just try out. But I used like everything from like a Bergantino Super Pre going into his mixing board. I think it went into like a UA 1176 compressor. But then I also had the Dark Glass Atom. I'm sorry, the advanced aggressively
distorting,
machine.
sure.
Yeah, that, and then that like split the clean and chorus sounds into a Trainer YBA1 head, which was going into an Emperor 215 cab, and then like the dirt was going into like an old SVT Skunk Works with another Emperor 215, and then a Bergantino HP2 with a 2x12 cab. And so, and it was a combination of directs, and I think there was, well, all said and done, there's probably 8 different signals going in. And as far as I know, I mean, he probably would have he could have very easily just said, okay, I'm going to take the clean, I'm going to take this distortion sound, and just let Mark think that he's using all of this stuff. But that was this batshit crazy signal chain for this record. And I loved it. I mean, it was fun being in the room, in the live room, and just like feeling all of that low frequency and just monster tone.
I fucking love it.
Yeah, and then lately, for live, it's a combination of the Bergantino amp rig, which is the Forte head, a 212 cab, and a 15 cab, and then the Super Pre, which is like a really great preamp where you can just sculpt your tone, very fine tune it. And then the Neural DSP Quad Cortex does a lot of heavy lifting too, especially for the modulated stuff. There's a track we have called Rain, which has like a really great sort of slapback delay and reverb with like all the trails and stuff. It sounds really luscious. And lately I've been using, finally, I got a little MXR clone looper. So I've been just kind of like intertwining some like really cool tremolo picking loops and reverberated stuff, and just creating a nice like atmosphere in between and in and out of songs and stuff. So kind of weave everything together.
Most of that is above any knowledge I will ever have, but I'm happy to listen to it because God knows I love hearing your bass.
Thank you. Yeah, like one thing people do ask me, just like in my years of doing videos and like just stuff for manufacturers, is when you use a pick, what kind of pick do you use? And most people, expect bass players to use like heavier picks for the attack. I'm the exact opposite. I love the feeling of Dunlop makes this nylon max grip pick, and I use like a super light, like 0.66.
Wow.
And I kind of get this sort of like pick scrape attack, kind of like What's His Nuts from Alice in Chains. The way that I pick against that. Yeah. And like there's like a scraping and attack that goes with it. That I love that sound.
I've tried the thinner picks on mine before, and I can't. I don't use a pick all the time like you don't, but when I do have to have the thicker, risk breaking it and your damn strings type pick. I've tried the thinner things a couple times, and it just I can't get my mind around it.
Yeah.
But anyways, enough nerding out on bass stuff for you and me, because I mean, hell, you've got your own bass podcast, don't you?
I do. Yeah, the Bass Nerds.
Let's go ahead and say something about that. The Bass Nerds.
Yeah, that was started by my buddy Jody Miller and I. He used to work at another store in Chicago Bass Club. I worked at CME. I opened the bass shop there. We were competitors for a while, and then we just naturally became friends. We know all the same people, and I was leaving CME, and the job was opening up, and he was just like, dude, like, why doesn't that store, they have such a massive reach, why don't they do a podcast? I was like, yeah, you should pitch it to him. And he's just like, well, instead of doing that, like, what if we just did a bass podcast? And just, we know all these artists, we have all these like manufacturers, let's just shoot the shit. And I was like, yeah, I don't want it to be a gear focused podcast. Like it'll have some stuff peppered in, but I want to hear stories and stuff. Because people have a lot to say. And Jody is really good about kind of keeping things. He just has such like a level head about him, and just kind of keeping things sort of like on track. He asks a lot of good questions, and I'm just the curveball. I'll ask like random stuff and dig in. So it works well. It's kind of like The Odd Couple, but
right.
Yeah,
but for bass.
But for bass.
So, couple days away from release day here. How you guys feeling? What's been the reaction so far? All the fun stuff.
It's been generally very positive. Like we've talked to a few publications who've gotten a hold of the record. They love it, which is cool. Interested to see like how things shake up or shake out of on release day. You never know with this sort of thing.
Sure.
But like anymore, I try to get into the mindset of I try not to care about what anybody else thinks about it, as long as the five of us are happy with it. I think that's always been the mission from the jump, is just to make records and songs and even like the stage performance something that we just feel proud of and happy with and have fun with.
Sure. The dry land is what it's called. I lost the title for a second there, and I can't think on my feet well enough to remember it. Comes out June 7th, which is a couple days from now. I've told you a couple times in conversation leading up to this that this is my favorite album of you guys'. I feel like I think this is something that a lot of bands probably aspire to, but something you can't actually try to do. Where this just feels like the perfect combination of you guys' last two albums. It's a little more streamlined than Mandala of Fear was, and it's more the runtime of American Scrap. It's got some of those folkier things from that one, but it's as heavy as. Is that, like, in making it, is that something that you're realizing, or have you noticed?
Yeah, I think we after Mandala came out, we had a few false starts with touring, ambitions, naturally, because of the pandemic.
2020, sure.
And then, of course, like, we were slated to do this great European tour, which got canceled halfway through because we got COVID. And but there was a lot of nice momentum towards that. But getting invited and asked to play stuff from American Scrap was interesting, and it fell at the right time, because we, like, while we enjoyed Mandala of Fear and putting that together, um, it just it seemed like we just had this internal obligation for ourselves to kind of get back to the Americana roots. But in that time, we were also, listening to even like darker and heavier, and kind of like pushing the envelope a little bit more with like some of the blackened stuff, which kind of makes an appearance on Mandala of Fear with this one song in particular called "A Nameless Dread." There's like some blast beat type stuff in there, but like Chris had been listening to, like, really falling in love with a lot of like the guitar sounds coming from like bands like Liturgy, for instance, and just like how you can have, or in Death Heaven, another example, you can have this like very intense, very fast, very sort of like crowded sound with some really beautiful, like, melodic guitar parts that are sort of baked into it. And that's kind of like, I think that song "In Time All Things" was the first one where we all sort of latched on to, okay, we've got to have this on the record, because it's just such great representation of what we want to do as the band. It has like the vocal rich harmonies, it has some of the acoustic stuff. It's like a very cinematic piece, which has like it's bookended by this very intense blast beat, and then this very intense use of space in the very end of it, with it's just the vocals and the drum hits and guitar hits. Um, and we just wanted to sort of let ourselves just create what seemed like the natural fit, rather than trying to define like what Huntsman is or should sound like based on the progression of, like, from our first EPs to Mandala of Fear.
Sure.
So we were really I think we were just very intent on making the right sounds for our own sake and our own satisfaction.
Was there? I assume there was some kind of conscious decision to pull back on where Mandala is so huge, and to kind of pull back, and I don't want to say streamline, but also want to say streamline the sound a little bit more, where it's pulled back to, I think Dryland is somewhere around like 42 minutes, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Was that? I assume that was a conscious decision, or is there like another album
Yeah.
sitting around somewhere?
We had a lot to say with Mandala of Fear because of the narrative that was around it. Like, there's a story that was told in 80-ish minutes of music that, like, we wanted to tell, and that's why it was accompanied by a graphic novel,
comic book, yeah.
Yeah, and like, we still have that like sense of storytelling in our music, even with the Dry Land. but it wasn't as on the nose for this record as opposed to previous records. But if you like, you know, if you ask any one of us, the answer will probably be different. I work my best with this band in particular if I have like a mental, like visual component to it, and there's a story playing out in my head when we like listen to it start to finish. And I did that with American Scrap when we were talking about how to put the songs in order. And I was like, well, this whole record sounds like the history and even future of the U.S. from its inception until, you know, what this dystopian future comes in. And we had some other songs on deck, which eventually made it to Mandala of Fear, which were like, well, let's hold off on these, and this can just be a continuation of that storyline. So if you like look at it in like a linear sense, and this is just my own interpretation, by the way.
Sure.
You have the history of the U.S. from American Scrap. It ends with the president, the last president, who there's some big bad thing coming that's unavoidable. It's kind of unexplained. Could be like, you know, nuclear war. Could be, you know, some sort of climate issue. There's no hope for humanity. Hug your loved ones. She ends up like fucking like lacing her family's dinner with food, and she goes and kills herself in the next room. Well, then like the way that I had Mandala in my head was, well, let's just have this be a continuation where like it focuses on this like soldier who's like also a girl, which you find out that like she ends up being the daughter of the president, and she ended up surviving. And I was like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we reintroduced the mom, the president, who somehow also survived? Which that didn't really make it into the storyline, but it's all kind of there in a way. Like, you know, we want it to be sort of a choose your own adventure kind of thing, and people interpret it their own way. But when it comes to performing it, kind of getting in the mood and setting the sort of like orchestration behind those two records, that's kind of where my mind goes. And the same thing goes with the Dry Lake, you know, with This Our Gospel. You just imagine like a red state sort of scenario where there's like intense evangelical fundamentalists who are like, you know, just like very abusive and violent and stuff like that, and sort of navigating and escaping the clutches of that, which is, you know, often prevalent in a lot of like post-apocalyptic novels and films and cinema. And Cruelly Dawns is sort of like, you know, the next step in that. There's a lot of you know, there's a lot of like mystical sort of elements or adjacent to that with that song. A lot of stoner like type narrative that's fun for it. Lean Times is just like there's a sense of hopefulness to that tune. Like we're all in this like these lean times together. If you think like, you know, Depression era type stuff. But there's going to be better times to come, and we're just going to make it better. Like all of this struggle right now is just for the betterment of our future generations, right? Then in Time All Things, this like you're kind of starting to accept your fate, but you're also kind of caught between opposites, life and death. Like you don't know if you're alive or not because of all the chaos around you and everything. Rain is just like, you think everything's like kind of finally reaching a calm, and then you realize, oh shit, no, you're wrong. Your new god is death, and it is not waiting for anybody. And then the Earth Site is sort of like ties into the theme of being stuck between two opposites. Like, you know, it's just like this. I don't know if you smoke weed, but like sometimes like you take a huge rip, and then you just find yourself in this sort of like emotional loop that you can't quite escape, and it's like this again intense sort of sadness that you just have to like let it pass through, and you know that might be analogous to just going through hard times and struggle. You know, a lot of this is a metaphor for a lot of the personal struggles that we've had as a band, particularly for Chris, who's been suffering. You know, he's been struggling with chronic back pain and sciatica, like needing a L5S1 fusion, pretty imminent. So there's just a lot to it. It's just a very personal record of what we're going through and kind of how we see the world around us and where it's going.
Yeah. I had a note here to ask about some of the issues and adversity that you guys have dealt with in making this, and I know that Chris has had some things, and then I think Kirill made it through the album and then dropped out, right? And that's how Gavin came on board. Can we do the cliff notes of that?
Yeah, Kirill he's got different priorities in life. With the sort of like intensity heating up with touring expectations and other things. He just found just not something that he can devote to. And so we'd already recorded this record. We felt an obligation to Prosthetic to do a lot of touring, but then we realized that it's more an obligation to ourselves, that we just enjoy playing live. We enjoy being out there, and so does Kirill. But all of the sort of logistics behind that can be kind of intense to be part of and everything. So once he departed, we were like, well, we want to press on. We want to continue doing this. There was a question whether or not we were going to have another guitarist at all. And we decided that what Kirill brought to the table, just throughout the whole history of the band, was so unique and kind of difficult to replace, because it was a lot of deliberate use of space and ambience and effects to sort of act as the glue that binds everything together. And once we started playing through our songs without his parts, it required a lot less riffing, which was also very much needed. And Chris was trying to fill in that spatial stuff, and it was just not something that we could achieve with just between the three instrumentalists, even with the vocals layered on top. And so Gavin, we put a list of people together who we wanted to, talk to, and Gavin was at the top of the list. We've been fans of Lavisher. We like his style. He's been a fan of ours. He's very proactive, can-do mentality, and it just was natural. We asked him. He came. He auditioned. It felt to me, the idea of auditioning for a band of our size just felt strange, but I looked at it as they were asking a friend to see if they fit and want to do this, and right away we were like, yep, he came prepared. He wants to do it. He's good with touring. Let's do it. Let's go. And it's been natural enough. And the icing on the cake with him is that, obviously we're a very vocal driven band, and his voice is awesome. It's also a very similar range to Chris's voice. So it's nice for Chris to be able to hand off parts in his range to Gavin, so Chris can focus on intricate guitar parts without having to stand still. It's kind of hard for him to do physically with his back issues, to stand by the microphone and sing and tap dance while standing on one foot. Kind of hard to do. So this gives him the flexibility to kind of be a little bit more mobile. I also kind of traded parts with Gavin, and then sometimes now we're singing with 5-part harmonies with Ray in them. It's the very end of Cooley Dawns. There's this random stacked vocal chord. It's an at the very end. And I think it in total it was 9 different vocal parts that we layered on in the studio. So for the live set, we're like, well, there's 5 of us. We can all sing. We all can hear each other. Let's do this. And that's where it ends up going.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of vocals here, I know that Amy has been on all the previous albums, but this is technically her first full-length album as a full-time member and helping with writing and all that. What did she bring to the table? What was different there?
More artistic input. She also is a songwriter. It's not. She's been out of practice to do solo stuff, but she used to do a lot of solo singer-songwriter things, playing guitar. And so with this band, she just was motivated to start writing lyrics, start arranging vocal parts with us, and was a much more active role in that. And even in the sort of progression of things and orchestration, what feels right, what doesn't, and getting her input was much more prevalent on this record. So a lot more artistic involvement from her. This Our Gospel is definitely her jam.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
like with the vocals having so many layers, a lot of these songs have a ton of layers to them as well. Where, you know, the whole sounds like one big, sometimes fucking ferocious sound, but there's a bunch of things going on underneath. Are there ever times like I'm always curious as to how that builds? Where is the mark of too much? Where is the mark of something needs to be added here, or this is fine just as an isolated thing? What's that whole writing process like to make those layers and come up with these just, some of these songs are more like movements than just songs at, 8 or 9 minutes, and with all the things that they have going in them. And it's just super interesting to me to try to pick at somebody's brain as to how all that comes together.
Yeah. We start with either with lyrics or with just a general narrative, and how we can basically score that narrative as if it were a story or just conveying a mood. And like getting more into more complex emotions and like ideas, how we can sort of score that as well. Chris and I had a history of writing stuff together before Huntsman, and even in like sort of an indie rock outfit, we never really did like linear songs. It was more like pre-composed stuff. Like some of the stuff, we were already kind of going in that direction. I think oftentimes it's Ray who will bring us back to earth. Just because, while he is an incredibly talented musician and drummer, percussionist, there are some limitations and stuff, naturally. And I think it's limitations that aren't really necessarily from him, but that he recognizes quickly that, like, can we perform this live? And also, like, is this something that we really want to listen to if it's just too disjointed? So, sometimes, like, we'll start like some like I use the herb site as an example here. That started as like we were warming up and turning our amps on, and Chris just made this really cool, or maybe it was Pharrell, this really cool like bendy, like use of feedback and delay and saturated reverb, and then like either the other guitarist Chris or Pharrell, whoever the other one was, kind of joined in with that and like created this sort of like delay effect within two guitars that were already saturated with delay. And I could hear, okay, they're in C sharp, and just started chugging and kind of like came up with this riff on the spot. So the beginning section of that was mostly improvised when we did it for the first time. And then Ray just jumped in with like the natural beat and progression. We just looped that for a while. And we're like, that's cool. Let's record this real quick. Okay, we got this down. Okay, where does it need to go now? And, I was like, sometimes Ray and I will have these harebrained ideas that could be a little complex, but if we pull them off, it's a lot of fun. And like, it usually starts with one of us being like, hey, I'm going to play this thing. Just see if you could follow along. And one of us will play something and the other will just sort of follow along and kind of like, we'll listen to each other. Like we speak a very similar language in that regard. So for this one, I just started playing this like chuggy bass line. And I was like, I'm thinking like this sort of like rumbly jungle-ish beat with the toms and stuff like that, 4/4. So I started playing the bass line. He naturally just played that beat right away. And I was like, cool, that's a cool progression. Then Chris just started playing this guitar part over top of that while I'm just sort of sustaining this like open note, palm muted thing. And they're two very different sections. They're almost like two different songs. But they work really well back to back. And the use of ambience is where Pharrell comes in to kind of like tie those two things together. What he's always been really good at. So that's kind of how it usually works. Sometimes one of us will come with a fully formed idea, and if people just latch onto it as it is, we just recreate it as much as we can. And Lean Times is kind of an example of that, but also Rain is an example of that as well. That's actually my first song that I'd ever written by myself.
Oh, really?
Start to finish, ever. Like, ever. And it was scary, and I was like, the band's probably not going to like this, but I'll shoot my shot. Let's see what happens. And they liked it a lot, and they were insistent on putting it on the record. And I was like, cool, well, what can we do to orchestrate and change? And they're like, nothing. This is great. Let's just do it as it is. And it was cool. It was very, very flattering
Yeah,
and
that's awesome,
encouraging.
man.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how well this blends with the whole Huntsman aura here, but I see your social media. I know you've got a fucking goofy side. You've already mentioned Claypool. Do you ever want to just go completely goofy and see if you can't get something fun into one of these songs?
Well, I don't know. I enjoy this sort of like, it's like I don't know. It's like a stage. I look at it, Huntsman as sort of like it's just a stage performance, almost like theater in a way. And it's a side where like I enjoy macabre. I enjoy like dark and emotional. I enjoy all of that stuff just as much as I do the silly fun side. Fortunately, between the five of us, like we all have this like crazy, ridiculous fun side. In fact, like it's so often whenever there's like a serious thing going on, like let's say in a recording session and stuff, and Ray and I specifically are in the control booth while the other person's doing a vocal take or guitar take. We're just like two like preteen kids just fucking with each other. It's hilarious, and sometimes it's really distracting, and we just like get caught in this giggle loop because we're like, we'll do something like we'll be sitting there like like legs crossed, and like someone will just like having a serious discussion, and then all of a sudden like he'll reach over and just knock my shoe off of my foot. Just like something totally stupid like that. And then like, with touring, and just doing shows out of town, we need space and time for us to do dumb shit. Of course, like once you get outside of Illinois, like fireworks are legal in every state around us. So we made a point, once to like stop and get a shitload of fireworks. We went to Ray's parents' house and stayed the night with the band we were on tour with, and we had a Roman candle and bottle rocket fight and a bonfire. Just dumb redneck stuff. So we get it out that way. But musically, I like the sort of seriousness and cinematic approach because it makes my irreverence and absurdity much more enjoyable when I can kind of escape back to it. But then when I have a serious thing to come to, it just kind of makes both things sweeter in a way.
Sure.
Being caught between two opposites, just like the record. Think about it.
And it seems like you and the bass player drummer relationship there that should be a strong thing, and it sounds like you guys have that sorted out pretty well.
Yeah.
The
For sure.
that's I think I've already used this line in this fucking conversation, but I think that's the thing that like a lot of bands, a lot of bass players, a lot of drummers fucking aspire to. So to know that extends not just from the writing process, but into being stupid for the fun of it, that's it warms my heart, Mark. I'm glad.
Mine too. Well, it's great because I think like Ray comes from a very musical family. His dad was a band director, so he knows when to turn it on. He knows when to get serious, kind of get organized, kind of bring us back to reality. And as do I. Like I came from music education, marching band, like kind of militant in its own way, and like structured. But we make sure to leave some like time and space naturally for playfulness.
Sure. I mean, with as dark and heavy as some of this stuff is, it's got to be some kind of I almost said necessity.
Yeah.
Necessity. Let's talk about the album art before I make up more words. It's super striking. I really love it. It's almost kind of minimal, so it's almost like in contrast with the the layered music, and then just 2 or 3 colors in the whole thing, and the woman and the fire, and I'm going to restrain myself from doing a bad Bill Cosby impersonation there with the woman and the fire, and then I did it anyways. Where did you guys end up with? How did you end up there? Who did you work with? Tell me about the art.
That was really Ray's department. He had this sort of vision of how to convey the idea of being stuck between opposites, mostly life and death. That's usually what's used. Or like in the case of the cover, you have this dancer, who's ballerina dancer, like who's like surrounded by fire and this sort of Greek imagery, which should be this like beautiful emotional performance that's just like utter chaos surrounding in like the midst of utter chaos. And the choice to use the color scheme with black, white, and gold, that was also like something that Ray envisioned. Again, like gold is usually triumphant and luxurious, and like the black and white use of this like bleak imagery in context with that, it again conveys that sense of like being in opposite directions. As far as the artwork itself, Ray like had been searching through a lot and came across Derek Setzer's work and was like, yeah, that's the artist. That's who I want to work with. I think that's who we should work with. I think he can nail this. Here's some examples from his portfolio. And we're like, yeah, let's just go for it. And so Ray had a bit of a prompt to give to Derek, not only for the cover or the back of the record, but also the insert that's going with it. And, which tells a story for each song in a way, a visual aid to all of those things. And yeah, Derek knocked it out of the park. Now, in addition to that, we sort of wanted to do the image, sense of image, and with that came like redoing our logo, going from like the previous logo that you saw, like Mandala of Fear and the Dying Pines EP. He wanted to kind of go with like a calligraphy adjacent style with like sort of like an old English or medieval sort of like bold font you see with a lot of bands like Primitive Pan, for instance, and make it sort of that luxurious, like dripping gold alchemy sort of look. And found this calligraphy artist called Pencilmancer to do that, and did it by hand and knocked it out of the park for us.
Fuck yeah, man! It is, like I said, it's striking is the word that always comes to mind for me with it, and it's the perfect choice for the album. It's great. What's your favorite song on the album? And you can't pick your own.
Well, that's good because I was terrified of releasing it. I don't like it. I would say it depends. It depends on the situation. Like, if I'm in the mood to like really like listen to something start to finish, Cooley Dawns, just because it's so exciting. It's fun as fuck to play. There's some like Chris Squire what's that song? Not Long Distance Run Around, Heart of the Sunrise kind of moments in there in the end that are fun to play. And there's like also this sort of like almost like Queens of the Stone Age, like bass and floor tom like rumbly in the middle of the song.
Okay.
I kind of like got in the mood for and a lot of vocal harmonies that are fun to sing, and there's like almost like an Uncle Acid sort of sound and then towards the beginning of the tune. So that one's fun. Earthside's really fun because of me being able to play with Ray and have that sort of like bass chug and stuff, which by the way, I mentioned this on a previous interview, but I'm finally admitting it. That bass line, like when we were doing it and we were like kind of like improvising it and stuff, I went home and I was listening to the like phone recording, when we first played it in the studio or in the rehearsal space. And I was just like, this technique that I'm doing, this like 16th note picking, like the rhythmic sort of thing, and the thing that I'm doing with like the open palm muting thing with my left hand. I know this from somewhere. Where the hell is this coming from? Especially in context with like the drums, like the 4/4. And then in the middle of the night, one night, I woke up and it Bow Wow Wow's I Want Candy came to mind. And I was like, fuck, if you think about it, you have like you have that drums. Obviously, the drums are far different on Earthside. But then what comes in is the bass.
Sure.
And the bass, he's doing this. It's a very similar technique where it's like chuggy right hand,
right,
palm muting here to make it a more rhythmic approach. And that's the truth of it. I was like, well, I guess this was inspired by I Want Candy.
I Want Candy.
So that's a fun one to play as well. But then, like when we play live, we did a show with the band Juno last year, and we played both In Time All Things and Earthside just to sort of like play it in front of an audience for the first time to see how people responded to it. And it was so fun because we had this like real intense quiet, this like subtle drone underneath. And then bam, we go into In Time All Things. And as you know, like it's a very intense blast beat, it's very loud. And just seeing like 15 or so people scattered through the audience, like the crowd just like jolt. But they were just locked in, laser focused. That was really exciting. So, yeah, I think it just changes with my mood.
Okay. Speaking of playing live, you guys have the release show coming up this. It's the release day, right? June 7th, and where you're planning to play the whole album in full.
Yep.
Any nervousness, trepidation about that? Excitement?
Nah, I mean, like, just I don't really get nervous with this band. I'm more nervous about like getting like the logistics of things, like something going wrong, like technically or something. But no, like I trust everybody on stage, and it's so easy to have fun with them and engage with them and listen. Especially, we've been using in-ear monitors lately because we've used so many stacked vocal harmonies, but with such like heavy guitars behind that became a necessity. And so now that we can hear everything as detailed as we can, it makes things so much easier to get into. Plus, I have like a little device. It's called a backbeat. It's a device that goes on your strap, and what it essentially does is it vibrates as you play, and it emulates that sensation that you get when you're like standing right in front of like a giant 8x10 cab or whatever. Like you're standing directly against it, and the bass is pumping into your back. You really feel the bass. Totally changes your playing. And it like I first used it. We played a show with Yob in 2019, and it was funny because like they wanted to keep their backline set up, and the Empty Bottle stage is not like your traditional stage shape, and so the drums were set up in the middle, and the bass cab I was like sharing their backline, and but like the way that we had to set up is that Ray had to set up his drums right in front of the bass cab, and he's just like, "Is that gonna be okay?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I got my in-ears and I got my backbeat and a monitor with. I'm good, dude." And so I could feel everything just as if I was standing right in front of my bass rig, and I could hear everything perfectly. And so that just makes it so much more enjoyable and easy to kind of get lost into.
That's fucking cool, man. I don't know that I've ever even heard of that. I will.
It is hands down my favorite bass gadget that has come out in the past as long as I've been playing. It's a great practice tool. It's a great supplement for your live sound. If you're using in-ears, it helps you feel the bass. So that's usually the thing that people are often missing when they switch to in-ears, is that they miss the feeling of either a three-dimensional sound based on the mix or just the feeling of the bass most of the time.
Yeah, I'm going to look into those. You guys are clearly making music that's genuine and true to you guys artistically, which is great for a ton of reasons. Now I'm going to ask a kind of douchebag question here, because you've got the big 8-9 minute songs that are fucking great, and the movement type thing that we've already talked about. Have you ever given thought to trying to do something more accessible? Something like verse, chorus, outro?
Yeah, we did that with the song "The Dying Pines," the acoustic song. We did our most recent release was that EP where we did the version of "Carry On" by CSNY, and even with that, we didn't do a direct copy of the original. Like the harmonies were there, but we did our own style to it. I don't know. It just, if it doesn't feel authentic, it's just not us. Sometimes we'll go in thinking like, yeah, let's just do something simple, verse, chorus. And we always find ourselves wanting to tinker with things. Like we're always changing things. Like even with the songs off of this newest record, we're still like making little subtle changes for the live show. And not because we can't play it the way it's recorded. It's just because maybe it's a little bit more fun right now because we're in a different headspace than when we originally wrote it. So there are some songs that are pretty simple, like in terms of the structure. Even Ride Out has a pretty straightforward structure to it, if you think about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if it feels right, it feels right, and we just sort of leave it alone. But even when it feels right, eventually we'll come back to it and tinker with it. We just have fun with it. Yeah.
Outside of the release show, what other live plans are there?
There is an anniversary party for a brewery that we haven't announced yet, somewhere in the world that we'll be playing, And
Stay tuned.
yeah, and we're also just like looking into some regional stuff. You know, for the time being, we're sort of just like letting the the release sort of like do its thing. You know, we were talking about doing full-fledged tours, but then last year Chris let us know about like how intense his back problems were getting, and so we were just like, well, let's just not worry about that. Let's just focus on the release show, and then as your health gets better and as your back gets better and you feel more confident to do that, then we'll start to put our name out there. But in the meantime, we've been sort of like contacting friends and bands and different venues and promoters and stuff here and there, and just said, hey, just throwing our hat in the ring, if anything arises in the fall, spring, something like that. So we'll do some stuff in the fall. I'm sure we'll do some stuff in like the late winter, early spring, and we'll see where it goes.
Fuck yeah, man. I'm speaking for myself. I know Columbus would love to see you. Let's go for drama here. Now, if I am remembering right, I think Ray and Amy are married.
Mm-hmm.
What is it ever weird working with a husband-wife duo in that space?
Not those two, no. Like I was at first, like I was, admittedly cautious because it's a tale of little time when it comes to bands. Like when like another partner comes in, or if there are two partners in a band, like it has like the recipe for chaos, but they're able to separate. Like first of all, they get along so well, and they share the same mind. They share the same brain cell,
Nice.
But it works. It works quite well. So I haven't really had any worries since when it was first being proposed, which was several years ago at this point, for her to come in. So it's been great.
No drama for me. How do you describe your music to like random family member that doesn't listen to this type of stuff?
Yeah, that's a tough one because you say metal, and of course their mind immediately gravitates towards like Metallica,
sure,
and or like Cannibal Corpse, like death metal and stuff. Like they're always like like that. It's like, yeah, there's an element to it, but then like we say, oh, like we're very much influenced by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young and bands like that, and King Crimson, and some family members who are cool enough, they're like, oh, that's really cool. I like classic rock too. And then like some younger family members, I'll say like, yeah, take like a band like Melvins and put CSNY's vocals on there and add a dash of yes, like that. I don't know how to describe it. It's just us,
Right. So I'm wearing my Snow Burial shirt. You guys are a noted Chicago band. The scene there seems to be just fine, to use the scene term. How has it changed or evolved in you guys' time?
Like the scene?
Yeah.
I think it's just gotten harder, but it's gotten more difficult to do things. I think it's a combination of the cost of doing like tours and production and stuff has gotten bigger. Then you've got the landscape has changed so dramatically because of companies like Live Nation making it harder for bands to make an honest living on the road. You've got record labels and Spotify like favoring streams and algorithms and use of AI for songwriters and stuff. And so I think that leaves a lot of artists feeling discouraged. And then you've got tools with social media and like feeding like what the algorithm favors, and trying to tailor your image and all of your content and everything towards that. And especially when you see like artists like guitar players and artists who are like big on TikTok, all of a sudden like they're playing shows and like they're playing to these big crowds because like they use the algorithm to their advantage. And sometimes it like makes people feel a bit discouraged because what they're seeing live and what they're seeing in their faces based on what the algorithm is feeding them, it just seems disingenuous. And like we've even like been encouraged to like tinker with that stuff a bit more, especially with my jobs and like what I do naturally, but it just doesn't feel right for us. So I don't know, it's like there's a general sense of like discouragement, and also everybody being like forced to be homebodies for like better part of a year plus 2 years. I think when the floodgates opened and people were allowed to start going to shows again, there was this massive, intense like race to get to the show. Like shows were filling out left and right, selling out left and right. And now it's just like people are a lot more like cautious of like how they're going to spend their money and stuff. So I don't know. Like the landscape is, I think people are just generally tired. They're just exhausted with everything that's being thrown at them from every sense, politically, musically, artistically, everything.
Everything is so much. Everything, like monetarily or emotionally or just every damn thing is. There's no. Yeah. That's a whole different.
With that said, though, I've noticed that there's just been a really great boom in hardcore and like that sort of that scene. A lot of like legacy hardcore acts, if you will, Botch, now Weekend Nachos is coming back. That Daughters had their moment in the sun. I don't know if I would necessarily refer to them as hardcore, but like there's some influences there. And then you've got bands like Drain, Military Gun, Conservative Military Image, fucking Turnstile, like those bands. Who's the other big one? Animal and the Sniffers, like those bands, like fast, heavy, raw, like this punk rock attitude, hardcore sort of sound. It's huge. It's just completely blowing up because it's just, music is cyclical, but that's like seems to be where the trends are going right now. Like I think people have had their fill for a while of like the sad bastard, like progressive sort of stuff that we bring to the table, and that's cool. It's fine. We'll be around.
Sure. Last question here before we get into some of the goofy stuff that we end these things here with. Just the general, because I don't know if you know this or not, but Chris was actually the first interview that this show did. And then, and then you guys were on, I think it was Kirill, you and Chris were on for Mandala. And, through Prosthetic and Steve and all that stuff, these things have happened and these connections have been made. So just kind of a big generic, how are things going with Prosthetic?
Good. I mean, it's going good. I was feeling this personal like motive to really up the ante with like our touring capabilities and just throwing our names out there for everybody who would look at us and trying to get us to do like more videos and stuff like that. And I think I had sort of like manufactured these expectations that I thought Prosthetic had of us, and in reality, they're just like, no, just keep doing what you guys have been doing. Like do shows when you can, tour, do some regional stuff, grow your reach around, like the Chicagoland area and like 300 miles around there, and just be authentic, be yourselves, and take the pressure off. I had a pretty earnest discussion with DJ about this pretty recently about it, and like he said something that was like very flattering, and that like you guys make timeless music, and that was just very encouraging. And I think he just wants us to just feel comfortable creating. And then with Steve is just like a great resource. Anytime we have any worries or questions or like want advice, like he's right there. He's gone hard for us from the beginning. And then we've got Becky and Will, who do PR for Prosthetic. Becky's been great for us from the beginning. And then with the new addition of Will has proven to be an amazing addition and great person to communicate with.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Will.
Yeah.
Him and I have exchanged emails as well.
Good dude.
Yeah, seems like a good dude for sure. So out of all that and into the goofiness here, one of these things I kind of can't wait to get to because of the connection from where you've done this before. But we'll start with the easy coffee or tea.
Coffee.
What's something you could eat for a week straight?
Believe it or not, like I make this salad.
Okay.
it's stuff and spice, like a spring mix with like I put a whole bunch of like fun like veggies and sliced apple, and I make a balsamic vinegar dressing with like crushed red pepper and stuff, and usually like some kind of goat cheese to kind of bring it all home.
All very metal. Chicken. Who doesn't love chicken? Beatles or Stones?
Beatles.
What's the fastest speed you've ever driven?
Oh, I don't know what it is in miles, but it was like roughly 300 kilometers per hour. I was on the Autobahn. My first time ever driving on the Autobahn. I was with my colleague at the time. We were driving from Frankfurt all the way to this town called Markneukirchen, which is right at the Czech border. It's where Warwick Guitars, that's where their factory is. And we rented a car and we were hauling ass. It was like a 4-hour drive. And of course, you get to the strip on some parts of the Autobahn where you're allowed to let loose.
Right.
And I was like, let's see how fast this Ford Kuga, which is like, like essentially an Explorer, can go. And I just floored it and white knuckled, and we were blasting like Wasted Tiamat by High on Fire.
Yeah.
And I drove for about like 3 minutes that speed, and I was like, I gotta slow down. In fact, we probably should stop because I need to settle down for a second.
Hopefully not in combination with what you were just talking about, but beer or liquor?
I'd say most of the time whiskey.
Yeah,
like bourbon specifically. I'm from Kentucky. Bourbon or Scotch.
If you had a superpower, what would it be?
Telekinesis.
Yeah, reading some minds, huh? Or is
no,
that moving stuff?
Yeah, moving shit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Telekinesis.
I read enough comic books that I should be able to know the difference. If you had speaking of comic books, if you had a superpower, what would it be?
I just answered that. Telekinesis.
God damn it, Clint, you read the wrong one. Scale of 1 to 10, how good are you at keeping secrets or reading questions?
I'd say like a solid 7.
Okay.
Yeah, depends on the secret.
Go-to karaoke song.
I'd say Are You Sure Hank Done It This Way by Waylon Jennings.
Okay.
Or lately I've been really wanting to do Don't Stop Me Now by Queen.
Okay.
I've like finally figured out how to hit those higher notes in a full voice without cracking and shit. So I want to give that one a whirl soon.
I mean, this seems like a good space to give it a shot if you want.
Nah.
No?
I've got neighbors.
Sausage links or patties?
Links.
Okay.
And although I kind of like what's it called? It's an Ohio thing. Geta. What's that shit called? It's like this like Odie sort of sausage patty that my best friend in the world, shout out to Max, introduced me to. He lives in Cincinnati. He's from Cincinnati. He usually has that in the morning. I think it's similar to like what they do in Philly. It's like scrapple or some shit.
What's it called?
Similar. Geta, I think it's Goetta. I want to say. Look that up real quick.
Meanwhile, you're telling me about sausage in Ohio.
Gouda. No, it's pronounced Geta.
I'm
gonna. It is. I'll read it to you. It's ground meat, steel cut oats, onions, garlic, and spices, and it's usually pan fried. Pretty good.
That sounds delicious. Yeah.
But I like sausage links though. Going to Germany quite a bit for my job.
Okay.
I love a good sausage.
Now the thing here is the album island question. You get sent to an island, you get to take one album with you. A, I want to see if you pick the same album, and B, if you do, I have a note about it.
I would say Fragile by Yes.
Okay, you did not pick the same album. I went back and did my homework.
Oh no.
Originally, you picked A Love Supreme by John Coltrane.
Another, yeah.
And
that was actually on my mind too.
As I was listening to the way you originally answered the question, it clicked in my head. I just had JP from Clutch on. Guess what his album was?
Love Supreme.
Damn right. Immediate. That was the answer. So
it's just such a beautiful, emotive record. It, like you can hear it. You can hear like the creativity. You can hear the emotion. It's just it's a masterpiece.
It's been on my to-do list for longer than I want to admit, and I haven't actually pushed play on the damn thing. I'm going to fucking do that this week.
Yeah, well, I feel the same about Fragile. Yes. I think that's also a masterpiece.
That one I have heard and can say, yeah, that's pretty fucking good. Mark, thanks a lot for joining me today. Do yourself a favor. If you're hearing this before June 7th, take a trip through Huntsman's discography to prepare yourself for an album that will, for absolutely sure, be tons of album of the year lists. I'm sober today. I swear to God.
Makes one of us.
That's a not normal thing for this show. Maybe even buy yourself some new speakers so that once it's released and you have a copy or you're streaming it, you can listen to the Dry Land at volume levels you've never previously experienced. It'll be worth it, I promise, unlike me saying it. Thanks as always to the Brimming Horn dudes for partnering with the show. Get you some delicious mead pronto. Be sure to use the code. For you Columbus folks, there will be a new partnership coming soon that I think you'll be interested in. Wherever you're listening to this from, hit that there subscribe button for me, please, and thank you. Follow the podcast and Huntsman on all the socials as well. There'll be links to all their socials as well as ours and the Brimming Horn folks in the show description. Now that we're through all that, I'm going to stop tripping over my own tongue and let you introduce this our gospel for us there, Mark.
Hey everybody, this is Mark from Huntsmen in Chicago, Illinois, and you're listening to This Our Gospel.